session. This is the joint session between the Repository Platforms Research Data Interest Group and the Domain Repositories Interest Group. Let me make this small. And the title of the session is Cooperating to Improve Innovation and Resilience of Repository Platforms for Open Research Data. And it's being organized by myself, Bob Downs, Kirsten Leonard, Lily Zhang, and Devin Ray Donaldson. So we're the chairs of these two groups. And there's the link in case people want to access the group online, the session online, I should say. And so I just want to give a quick review of the two groups. The Repository Platforms for Research Data Interest Group, we have chairs of Lily Zhang, Devin Ray Donaldson, and me, Bob Downs. And we've had several previous co-chairs through the years. Most recently was Yao Roca da Silva, and then David Wilcox, Ralph Mueller-Peppercorn, Stefan Kramer, and Michael Jones, and our tab liaison is Helen Claves. And then Kirsten Leonard is the chair of the Domain Repositories Interest Group, and the previous chair was Peter Dorn, and the tab liaison is Gretchen Green. So just a little bit about the groups for those who aren't familiar. The Repository Platforms for Research Data Interest Group, but we're really focusing on improving the usability and technical capabilities of our repository platforms. And we're trying to get members of the community to share their information with the community. And we're doing that by collecting usage experiences, defining requirements, evaluating implementations, and identifying limitations of current solutions. And hopefully we can provide recommendations, knowledge collections, or new working groups, which spawn off every once in a while. And that's a link to our Repository Platforms for Research Data Interest Group webpage. And the Domain Repositories Interest Group, they're covering all domain repositories that have shared interest in either data curation, dissemination, preservation, institutional sustainability, etc. And they're working to provide a forum for sharing practical experiences in developing joint projects. And you can see their webpage there, the Domain Repositories Interest Group. So together, we're operating this joint session, and we've had a couple of these joint sessions because we found them really successful. They've attracted a lot of interest, and people have encouraged us to continue doing it. And so we've been doing that. Today, after I talk about cooperating to improve innovation and resilience of repository platforms for open research data, Lily Zhang will then talk about progress on the CAS, Open Science Infrastructure and Services. And then Kirsten Leonard will talk about Council for Data Facilities and Shared Infrastructures for Earth Science Data Repositories. And then Guido Eben is going to talk about Science Mesh, harmonizing architectures and APIs across operators to reduce technical debt and increase cloud, I should say. I've got the cloud on my mind. And then we're going to have a good discussion, I hope, on opportunities for improving collaboration among repositories. So I just want to introduce the topic by saying that sharing offers opportunities to improve the capabilities for using open data. And we can share challenges such as those that are faced by various repositories, and we can find that if one repository is facing a challenge, others also may be facing the same challenges. And in this way, ways can be identified to address such challenges. We also can share innovations and describe some changes that we've implemented, and that can help to guide others. We also can identify ways of improving on a particular implementation. That is, if one repository is implementing something and they find some pitfalls along the way, they can share that information with others, and hopefully the others will have a smoother go. We also can collaboratively develop and share open source software. So this is a great opportunity. There's no sense in reinventing the wheel, as they say. And so these can be software for either replicating the data or for accessing and analyzing, or even for providing services and apps, etc. Then we can also share lessons learned, and each repository can help the others to overcome some of their deficiencies, or if there are staff shortages, for example, you can help to get people up to speed. So cooperation can also improve the resilience of the data repositories. And there are various challenges that domain repositories face in terms of sustainability. Often, reduced funding levels can really put a dent into the capabilities of the repository to operate. And often it's difficult to convince sponsors to fund operations. And so you have to identify ways of funding development and try to keep the repository going that way. And there are various opportunities, though, for the repositories to cooperate, and they can do this on professional development activities, from partnerships, or identifying complementary skills where the expertise of the staff can be pooled. So here are some questions to consider and for our discussion later. So as we hear from the others, we can think about these questions. How can the repositories find partner repositories for new projects? How can the staff help other staff to improve and understand new technology? And how can sponsors help data repositories to cooperate? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lily. So I will stop sharing now. Lily, are you going to be able to share your slides?
Thank you. I think I'm okay to start. Share this one.
Yes, we see them, Lily. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the friends here. I'm Lily from CNIC. Very glad to see you all in this session. And my report is about some open science infrastructure and services practices progress in Chinese Academy of Sciences. And I see that we have some of these old friends here, but also some very new ones. So still at the beginning of my presentation, I would like to say something about who we are. The China Science and Technology Cloud is one of the key national infrastructures in China. It's included in the 13th National Information Plan. And the aim of CST Cloud is to support open science research, especially focusing on different disciplines to provide the integrated cloud services for the discovery and the delivery of different research resources. And from this slide, you could see that there are cloud services from different layers, like from the infrastructure layer, the platform layer, and the software layer. We have strong connections with data centers of different level. disciplinary science clouds and as well as demonstrations of subjects. But the question tends to us is how could we just embrace open science? So still a little bit going back to open science and the infrastructures behind. Open science, I think, is not a very new concept, and for open access to publications, open data, they all have quite long history. And looking back into the recent 10 years, we could still say that open science is trying to boost in many ways. Like science as an open enterprise in 2012, it highlights the sharing of different research resources, and the boundary between those could be shared and those that might not be. And then we see that UNESCO launched the Open Science Movement, and for International Science Council and the CODATA, they all highlight the sharing like data across different disciplines and things like that. And the open science recommendation just provide something in detail about how we could do to let the research resources a better flow across different subjects, across different regions. And among all of these elements that are included in open science, we see that the supporting infrastructures is one of the key pillars. And there are already some of these infrastructure level practices around the world, such as that in Europe, in Africa, in China, in Canada, in Malaysia, in US, in Australia, and many, and also in disciplines and in many other examples that might not be listed, but they are happening around the world. So what could we do to just collaborate all these things together? I mean that the better connectivity between those infrastructures to let them better connected. This way, the research resources can get better interoperability solutions. And for us, based on the seed funding from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, we are collaborating with the CODATA to launch the Global Open Science Cloud Initiative. And within this cloud initiative, we just get this seed funding for international alignment. This alignment will support infrastructure collaborations in which the anticipated actions may include like the policy study, the technical development, the test bed and demonstrations, and last but not least, the global alignment based on this. And the deliverables we anticipate may include that whether we could establish a kind of framework for the GEOS policy and techniques, the test bed validations for those policies and the techniques developed under this framework. We could provide something like the roadmap and establish a network and for community outreach for this GEOS initiative and things like that. And the next part follows with some of the recent progress based on this, some of them from the case perspective and some of them with strong collaborations with CODATA to help for the international alignment. As I said, is engaging the CODATA decadal program and working groups and case studies has been established to get it implemented. I think some of you has already be involved in this GEOS initiative, and next one shows some of the understanding for what is global open science cloud probably might be. The framework probably may include many layers, like for global research and education network, the objectives might be to co-develop a scalable end-to-end software-based global network. And for the computing, the storage, and the resources level, we would anticipate if it could be a little bit more flexible, dynamically enhanced environment in which we could just have existing computing infrastructures and the services that could follow the cloud paradigms. And for the data layer, probably we could explore better solutions for data management and capacity building for big data analytics. And based on that, we will have those services for the science community, in which we could see that the resources are distributed with multi-site cloud-based facilities. And we would like to support the researchers with resources across different domains. And based on that, we will have a better connection with the global researchers focused on different disciplines. And based on this framework, there comes some of the recent progress. The first one is the secure authentication authorization infrastructure. So we have already established a platform called the CSD Cloud Passport. The use of that is to provide better access for researchers, mainly from the case level, to get access to research services and resources around the world. And the matrix shows that we have over 1 million registered users. We cover almost most of the institutions in case, and we have a lot of applications integrated here. But facing the current situation, we are changing this CSD Cloud Passport to a new platform called CSD Cloud AI. In this, we are trying to redesign and redevelop a sustained and robust system in which we could have federated users' identity authentication authorization, that we could enable access to those open and convergent global resources and facilitate the interoperability of cloud services, especially under kind of like fair conditions between different service providers. And based on this secure connection, the next thing we have is a cross-continent test bed with our strategic partners, the EGI. And this cloud federation just help us to get better connected with computing resources connected. And in our future plan, we will have demonstrations in space physics and biology to get them better implemented with research resources from different sets that could be better converged together for the research of a larger group. And the last thing we do is the policy study. As I mentioned that our GEOS initiative has been engaged with CoData, and some working groups and case studies has been established recently, and the policy work will be one of them that will be collaborated with the policy and the legal working group. And the things we plans to start is to have a review of the GEOS, the open science clouds around the world, and identify the priorities, potentials, and find a gap between the current and the future situation. There will be guidance case by case, and we will have validations of those rules and summarize them as the general guidance that could provide the policy level solutions for the interoperabilities between different partners. And anticipated deliverables may include that essential policy vocabularies and priorities and guiding principles and the framework, as well as others. And based on those policies study, we also have the case study thing. There are already 5 of them selected for the GEOS showcase. And among all of them, one I have been anticipated is the SDG 13. We also have others, like I mentioned, one for space physics, another for biology. We also have case studies in health data and some other data interoperability topics also. And in this SDG 13, what we want to face the challenges about the data issue. there will be data of very large scale. And for SD13, it's about the climate change and natural disasters. And for decision making, we need high precision and real-time data. And the situation currently is we have distributed platforms, but we want cloud services on demand. So we need international alignment and effective ways to support such decision making in disaster mitigation, long-term and short-term climate prediction. So our case will focus on some of the things like this is the topic, and we will deal with different patterns of data like temporal spatial data for climate change. We will collect and push the sharing of those research resources, especially on extreme climate disaster. We will have short-term and long-term both monitoring and forecasting of climate disasters and the control of the things if possible. And this slide shows some of the key issues that might be embedded so far. I think this is some of these key issues in SD13 case, but it probably will be also share similarities with other showcases. The first thing is about the data and the policy interoperability. We will have data from different sources, like we have different regions of data. They belongs to different thematic, especially for climate change, for natural disasters, and those data may be different types, and they need different models and algorithms to get them processed. However, on the other hand, for the final decision making, we will need big data that could be that could have all this data fused together. So we need to get a kind of data and policy interoperability solutions to facilitate this research. And another thing is the technical challenge. We need the open and better connectivity between repositories, platforms, and systems, and even research environments for those cloud services. So as researchers, no matter where you are, you can have those cloud services that get multiple different research resources, like for data, for softwares, and for the publishing, the processing, the analysis of those data for the final result we would anticipate. So we need such robust and sustained support for these things of different scope. And based on that, we also have some of these conferences and events based on the collaboration with some of our partners, like the talk initialized several years ago. And I think some of you also joined the 2019 discussion in Beijing, which we have the idea, the global open science cloud idea proposed. We also had some of these very interesting workshops with our partners, like with EGI Codata and many others. And besides that, there are some of these upcoming events. After the RDA, we anticipate last year we will have some other conferences. Probably we can just meet you there, like the International Symposium on Open Science Cloud. We scheduled, probably it might be autumn in Beijing. Hope to see you all. This morning, I was traveling by metro to my office to catch up this meeting. As some of you mentioned that probably the last face-to-face meeting in RDA I have anticipated is the Helsinki one. And very appreciate to stay online to see you all, and hope probably sometime near we could have a face-to-face meeting to talk about everything we are all interested. So if some of these ideas you are interested, just feel free to just there are some of the information you can join us, so you would like to turn to for some more details. So there is my talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lily. That was great. We're going to move on now to Kirsten Leonard, our next speaker. Kirsten, are you able to share your slides, or should I?
I can do that. Let me try.
I
Okay.
see them.
You can see it. Let me go into the right mode here and minimize all our faces so they're not in the way. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to update everybody on what has been going on in the Council of Data Facilities. I've presented before about the CDF in this session or shared sessions, but I'm still going to introduce those who haven't been at any talks about what the CDF is, and then talk a little bit about the experiences that are emerging from our efforts to build shared infrastructure for our science data repositories. Oops, that button didn't work. So the Council of Data Facilities is sort of a bottom-up initiative to bring data facilities in the earth and space and environmental sciences together in order to better coordinate among these facilities and work towards more integrative interdisciplinary science enabled through interoperability and more consistent data services. The Council of Data Facilities was founded quite a while back already now in 2014 through the EarthCube program, and has been operating under a charter that defines its mission, goals, governance, and membership. The CDF currently has, I think, 47 members in different categories, being facilities funded by the National Science Foundation, international members, or larger facilities. And we have been meeting over the years twice a year in person, obviously not the last 20 months or so. But we hold regular monthly meetings, virtual, to exchange about new developments and national, international trends and so on. The CDF's goal is to promote the value of domain-specific data services in the earth, space, and environmental sciences, and more broadly. And I think that's one of the reasons I actually agreed to chair the domain repository interest group in the RDA. And it also really tries to help data facilities overcome common challenges. And it's been doing that through communication in the first place. In the last 2 to 3 years, the two main points of discussion and priorities really have been the development of shared infrastructure across the participating data facilities, and the issue of sustainability, and in this case here, specifically sustainability of the organization of the Council of Data Facilities. And I will come back to that. Just for those who hadn't the opportunity to learn anything about this shared infrastructure initiative of the CDF, the concept was that facilities could work together with a shared collective infrastructure that would co-locate computational and storage resources with cloud and high-performance computing environments. And it would focus, would allow then, to have the data facilities themselves focus more on the domain-specific curation services, following common best practices, while the infrastructure would be sustained through a shared infrastructure, through a shared staff. It was hoped that this would help actually build a more mature culture of coordination and shared resources among the data facilities. An important aspect that had been discussed at multiple meetings of those who participated in discussions was that this could not lead to a single large repository or facility, but it would need repositories to remain autonomous and have control over their scope, their operations, while they would be benefiting from the use of a collective infrastructure. So we worked actually 2 years ago during a workshop on the value proposition for this shared infrastructure. We are convinced that if we share infrastructure and co-locate computing resources and data storage, we would help research scientists to do more interdisciplinary and innovative science, because they can more easily access data and services in a consistent manner. It would help data facilities, obviously, to operate more efficiently with more resilience, more trustworthiness based on the resilience and sustainability, and have guidance on what type of best practices should be followed so that services can actually converge. It would obviously also help funding agency to, on the one hand, accelerate scientific discovery by supporting data resources to become more closely located and more consistently accessed, and by also helping the facilities to really focus on the curation of the data. So the challenges of moving forward, as I might not have mentioned it yet, but we established as the CDF a working group for shared infrastructure back in 2018. This working group did a few surveys to identify what would be the common needs for CDF members with respect to shared infrastructure. And it started to create a shared infrastructure plan for the CDF. We ran multiple surveys, as I said, and we organized a workshop that actually managed to build consensus on a roadmap how to move forward in a time frame of 5 years in building this infrastructure. Obviously, creating a shared infrastructure needs quite a bit of resources. So we got in touch with our funders and discussed potential proposals for building the infrastructure, but we were in the first place encouraged to rather focus on the governance, on building consensus, in building in more inclusive approaches to the CDF that would not just encompass the larger facilities, but also smaller data activities. So we wrote that proposal, a research coordination network for the CDF, and unfortunately it was declined. So since fall 2020, we have been trying to reorganize and take new approaches on obtaining funding and figuring out a way forward. Some groups have worked on suggestions for shared infrastructure architecture, for shared infrastructure services, but it has been quite difficult to build consensus, and that is in part due to the very diverse membership of the CDF. So the question here becomes, do we form activities within the CDF that not necessarily everyone buys into? So there is, again, quite a bit of work more on the community building side than on the technical side. At the same time, sustainability has become a major concern because the CDF has been supported through the EarthCube program, through the EarthCube office that helped support the meetings of the CDF particularly, and its governance structure. So we had a strategic planning session this year in conjunction with the EarthCube annual meeting, where we asked the major question: what are really the most important CDF functions that could advance the impact of data facilities in the Earth, environmental, and space sciences over the next 5 years, and that would make data facilities participate in this activity. It was a brainstorming activity on this top level question, and then more of a deep dive into other questions such as what organizational structure, communication channels, and so on can support these functions. What are the most important activities that the CDF can take to develop functionality that is needed, and really what resources do we need to move forward? So what came out of this brainstorming session was that the most important activity that the members would like to see have to do with interoperability standards and converging on standards for APIs, for vocabularies, for high-level metadata, so that the community can, in a consistent manner, move forward towards fair data. The second most most important activity that members brought up was to really foster engagement of the research community and an exchange among the CDF members, sort of keeping the monthly meetings, smaller meetings, the annual meetings going to encourage more information flow, more exchange that would hopefully lead to collaborative activities. The third priority actually remained shared infrastructure and technology approaches to share infrastructure. The fourth priority was to find and promote strategies for long-term funding that ensures the sustainability of the data repositories themselves. So obviously, all this needs resources, and we came up with a laundry list of everything that we need, anything from a project office that should be permanently staffed with administrative support and so on, to a common space on the web for sharing information and so on. We talked about pilot projects for community engagement, for technology labs, specifically also for maintaining vocabulary servers, ontologies, and so on. So as I said, this is really a whole laundry list. And we started to compare also to groups that have achieved a more sustainable and ongoing collaboration across facilities. And we specifically thought about the NASA group for Earth Science Data, the working group, where the participating projects, the participating data repositories are actually have budgets in their proposals to participate in these shared activities. So moving forward, we want to create a governance structure for the CDF. We want to be able to support working groups and to support better communication. So we do need to find resources. As a next step through longer discussions and getting feedback from the funding agency, we are moving forward with a task force that is charged to define a path forward with a proposal that would provide the resources for planning activities for the future of the CDF as a sustainable collaborative network. The recommendations of this task force are supposed to be provided to the CDF Executive Committee in spring 22. So just to summarize briefly, the takeaways from all these from all this history of CDF activities is that overall, the CDF is really considered useful and necessary by its members as a way to collaborate and to coordinate. But the diverse range of members with different operational needs, different resources, or varying constraints in the way they operate has really created challenges for developing a vision and an implementation for shared infrastructures that all members can buy into. We know that finding a sustainable model for the organization to move forward is absolutely critical, but it requires effort and funding. So we sure hope that with this new task force and the proposal that will come out of this, we can move forward towards a successful vision how the future of the Earth-Cube Council of Data Facilities is going to look like. Thank you, Bob. That was it. And I can stop sharing.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Kirsten. That was fantastic. Our next speaker, Guido Avon, he gets the prize for being up. It's well after midnight there where he is. So he's managed to stay awake for us, and we really appreciate him. He's the trooper here. Please go ahead, Guido. Yeah, we see your screen.
And of course, I should unmute. See, I'm present. No guarantees for cogency. Here we go. Wait a minute, full screen. There you go. I thought you were going to berate me over this ridiculous title. All right. So here's a few words on a similar looking infrastructure. With a few comments that really ring with what Kirsten was just talking about. You may be aware that in the field of storage provided to research projects, particularly if done so through national e-science providers or national research networks, you may know that the dominant paradigm of the past few years are the synchronization and sharing services. If you're familiar with brand names, OwnCloud, NextCloud, Cfile, etc., you may well have a domestic provider that makes available these sorts of services. I admit that the lens I'm using here is slightly Euro-focused, but that's because the project I'm going to talk about is, in fact, Euro-focused. There's a lot of these, and they're getting ever more popular. I realize immediately that talking about storage isn't the same as talking about repositories. I do not for a moment pretend that this is an infrastructure that you might in fact use for what you're trying to do, although as with any disrupting service, they tend to glob on additional service definitions. But to begin with, this is just to say that these are growing in popularity, and that when we began to realize that they were growing in popularity, we started running a yearly conference to simply talk about issues encountered, share lessons learned, etc. And that too grew into a fairly large community of loosely coupled operators who share opportunities and woes. This is a map of the last conference, which was unfortunately had to be held online, which probably accounts for that we had such a broad scope of entrance. When they were held in a face-to-face fashion, we got slightly less broad worldwide representation, but still encouraging results. And we began to realize over the years, we've been hosting these since 2014, we began to realize that, as I said, people were adding more services to this underlying substrate. So in some countries, these sync and share stores began to be used as a mounting platform for compute. In some, they were being linked into backend repositories. Some of them were being augmented by FAIR type services, by metadata annotation. So they're beginning to blossom into data science and research environments. which is really encouraging, but was still very piecemeal and very loosely coupled. If you had your project defined on, say, the Italian second share store, and you wanted to involve Dutch users, Scandinavian users, the entire environment had to be set up again, even though we realized that those Dutch or Scandinavian users had domestic services that they were defined on as well. And anybody who was building add-on services was doing this at their own behest as a local deployment. So the tech debt was just increasing and increasing. And collectively, we weren't really able to articulate to vendors precisely what we would benefit from and what would make for a good joint development. So we decided that this couldn't go on. We had to figure something out. So we pitched this as an EOSC project, and lo and behold, we got funded, which was it's a mixture of excellent and awe-inspiring, because then you have to deliver. We've been going for about a year and a half. Started in January 2020. We got our 6-month COVID extension, which it seems most of the EOSC projects are getting, because in fairness, it is harder to progress things when you're not physically in a room and able to bang the table. You can have many of these sorts of online meetings, but it is just slightly too easy to agree and move away, and then later on figure out that you didn't quite get to the bottom of things. So we had another 6 months. So we're going to be going on for a while yet. So if anybody is keen to give us a bump steer in particular directions, you still have plenty of time. And the point is to interlink these services in many aspects. In an operational sense, we want to build interoperability. The protocols are available inside of most of the sync and share stores anyway, and we're also building an interoperability framework that we have begun deploying. So any site can talk to any site and access all of the data available in all of the other nodes. And if a new node joins and follows the same protocols, they'll be able to do that too. So that's on a very tactical level. So interoperate and make it accessible, all the data inside of all of the stores. When you have that API defined, which we are defining and working with the vendors to define, when you have that defined, you can also share upper layer add-on workflow additions. So if one site develops an interlinking protocol into Jupyter Notebooks, to name something very practical, all the other sites can use the same application stack and deploy it locally. So it only needs to be developed once, and this can now be developed by a consortium because it's useful to pool this money now and deploy it at all the other sites with no further reconfiguration necessary. But we're going to go further than this. It won't be a loosely coupled mesh of nodes. We're actually defining the governance that will govern, obviously, the operations and interoperability going forward. So nodes, and we're talking about what sort of cut we expect to take from yearly subscriptions so that we can fund a central organization to run this. It'll have to be very loosely coupled initially, because I don't think we can afford more than 1 or 2 FTEs to run this in the longer term. But this is definitely and explicitly the idea. Why are we doing this? Not just to reduce the tech debt and make all of this data available, but also because users are becoming used to this being the norm from commercial services. The ultimate example, obviously, is Facebook, or take a LinkedIn. When people join that service, they expect everybody to be there and all of the data to be accessible immediately. We can't continue by providing silofied, country by country domestic niches and expecting the users to cobble all of the data together themselves. We need to make that available by default. That's why I talk about the flywheel. We do expect, we hope, but I do expect that once we kickstart this mesh with a good set of launching partners, I'll give you a slide later on, that it'll be attractive enough that we will see new nodes joining. And these nodes don't necessarily have to be an entirely fleshed out sync and share node, so long as they speak the interoperability protocols and or the add-on API, they could be of slightly differing value. I might even, I wouldn't be surprised if we had 1 or 2 repositories joining in this manner. We are talking, for instance, for those who are familiar with the landscape, we're talking to Zenodo, for instance, and we're talking to the Open Science Foundation to join this mesh in using these sorts of protocols. Doesn't mean that they can't represent their capability through other means, but they can also make their data available through this mesh. It's an and solution, not an either or. So these are the initial partners and a notional sense of how many users are on the launching customers. It's a good smattering of Euro nations to begin with. It is Euro funding. The Australians, me being the Australians, we have joined this because we need to attach ourselves to a flywheel, and this seemed to be the most feasible one for the moment. These happen to be the funded partners, but it definitely is not limited to Europe. That is not the point. The point is we hope to grow this into a global mesh. It doesn't have to be the global mesh, but a feasible way of addressing all data in all of these stores. And the point very much is not to invent new things. So as much as the protocols are already available inside of either these sync and share stores, or say, if say the consortium of, or the group of practitioners inside of the repository space have settled on, say, SWORD v3, then let's speak that and make sure that everything interoperates over those protocols. The point very much is to become an operational mesh using existing practices, not to invent new things and write a beautiful paper about it. I just have this slide in here. I don't expect you to get this straight away, but I expect to upload the slides afterwards. And if somebody wants to peruse precisely how all the things fit together, go back to this slide, send me a desperate email and ask me to explain it again. So thank you very much. Oh, I should have left my email there. I will do that in a second after I'm done. Thank you very much. Questions?
Great, yes, thank you very much, Guido, and thank you also, Kirsten and Lily. We see some questions in the chat here. Right now, I see a question from Bonnie Carroll. Bonnie, did you want to elaborate on that question?
It's hardly a question. Actually, I was just seconding what Guido was saying. It's the idea of user expectations is so important in our everyday lives. Our data is just totally interoperable. All kinds of data, all the recommendation systems, think about what kind of data is integrated, and yet science is totally poor. And the expectations of science users, if you can't deliver all of that, they're not going to bother. So I thought that was point. It's not it was an affirmation of the interesting thought.
Yeah, it's an expression of joint misery, right? Oh dear, why is it like such? Yeah, true. And why is funding typically landed on a domestic country by country basis when the game is so vigorously international? Yep, this is an effort to try to redress it, and at least butter knife some of the funding that has landed domestically into a pan-European to begin with, but hopefully broader organization. The governance that we're writing up is meant to be able to accommodate any country, any node from anywhere. But you're absolutely right, yeah. And why, if you'll allow me a second question of yet more to spare, why do users put up with so many demands from the cloud services that they join? Well, I don't expect an answer, but it's just surprising how much they will trade just to be able to do their business.
Yes, and I see Lily has her hand raised. Lily, did you have a comment or question on that?
Yeah, sure. Just another question to Guido. Thanks for your presentation. Could you please say a little bit more about the interoperable platform? I think you mentioned that slide, but it's quite quick. Something more about your idea. Thank you.
Okay, right. That's actually relatively straightforward. We're currently able to talk quite extensively to 3 vendors that have joined this process: Nextcloud, OwnCloud, and Cfile. And we're managing to convince them to settle on a data access protocol, which started out at OwnCloud and then was adopted by Nextcloud, and Seafile are looking into it. And on an application interface, an API, which we're calling the CS3 API for the moment, but if that gets renamed, well, we started out as the CS3 community, the cloud synchronization for sharing CS3. But if they want to rename it, that's fine. The point is we have a protocol for data interoperability, which it's already present in most of the vendors' packages, and a protocol, an API for application access. For those vendors that don't implement that yet, we are providing a reference implementation. The reference implementation is called Riva. And between the nodes, for the moment, what we have decided to do is, next to the storage and the synchronization platform, we will always drop a node, a running implementation of the reference platform, so that we are certain that everybody can always talk to everybody through the interoperability platform, if not directly to vendors. So if a new vendor wants to join this effort, or a node that doesn't speak the protocols wants to join the effort, they need to, or they're simply able to front it with the interoperability platform, this being a running copy of Riva, the reference implementation, which we make available. And then Riva will talk to the backends and the front ends, so that everybody can always deploy simply from GitHub a version of OCM and CS3 API. The beautiful thing, though, is that it looks like, certainly for OwnCloud, almost certainly for Nextcloud, and Seafile are making strides, that if you deploy their next generation product, so I won't name names, but if you from these vendors, if you develop the next generation product, it will have OCM and CS3 API baked in already, so the interoperability platform won't be necessary for those. But there could be other types of nodes. Like I said, a pure repository might want to join this based on those products. That could well work. Sorry to go long.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for that question, Lily. And relatedly, I'm wondering, Guido, you had talked a little bit about the growing pains or the user expectations in trying to meet those user expectations. And I'm just wondering, in terms of knowledge being shared among the consortium members, do you envision the partners being able to reconcile the growing pains with such user expectations?
The whole point of the project was to address that. Whether it'll work, we'll have to see. We have emerged from having been to these yearly conferences since 2014. It very much started out as just the room is on fire, great panic. Oh my Lord, we never expected so many users. But between about 2016 and 2018-ish, 19, most of us figured out how to cope with the growth, just a pure growth. And that's when the appetite to add more services on started appearing, which in itself started a new cycle of growth. And some ad hoc, it was very ad hoc then, but it started happening, ad hoc attempts at trying to share parts of the stack, not developing the entire set of add-ons yourself on a node-by-node basis, but now figuring out who was doing something cool and then trying to beg, borrow, steal from them, but very ad hoc. And the project tries to formalize that, so that whenever somebody even starts on a new edition, they do so in an interoperable manner using agreed upon protocols and APIs, and that there is a signaling mechanism and a governance mechanism that it's made available at an early stage, and there is a round robin request to join the effort, etc. Whether we'll be able to cope, look, half of it is a sine qua non. If we don't, then we'll eventually become irrelevant. And the other one is, and that's maybe slightly more cynical, but also more can do, researchers will use anything they can lay their hands on. And there tends to be a tendency among service providers to only deploy the perfect system and to continue to polish it until it's perfect, and only then to launch it. And yet when you launch something that's reasonable, it can't be complete crap, of course, but when you're close to sort of the 80% version, launch it. You will find a lot of users willing to use it simply because it's good enough. Is that an answer?
Yeah, yes, that's great and very encouraging as well. I also see in the chat, there's a note from Graham to Bonnie, a little conversation going on here. And I'm just wondering if either of you, Graham or Bonnie, might want to elaborate on that.
Well, I responded to Graham. It's all political. I mean, the reality is we understand why we don't have interoperability. It comes down to money and will. But it's a great kind of public relations thing. The fact that why would you put up with this in science when you don't put up with it in shopping? You know, you don't put up with it. Put up with it in science. I mean, it's the whole concept. It's not the practicality of the concept. It's just the impact of the concept. It's political. It's a metaphor. You know. Yeah.
I'm not sure I entirely agree personally. I think kind of like maybe I've seen this shift. I would say that there is more of a desire higher up to kind of have interoperability, but fundamentally, you know, the sort of questions which are asked of, you know, can you do X and Y to make sure these things can work together? The nuts and bolts of it are really, really hard to do. I mean, to kind of do it at scale as well. When you're sort of trying to tackle all the, you know, the V's of the big data challenges all at the same time. If you take one bit of data, yeah, you can sort of go away and you can sort of do something with that, and you can make sort of nice interoperable things. But it's when you try to kind of cope with such the huge variety of what's out there, I think that's really been the thing that's been a big drag on the ability to be able to do this.
Well, we may not be talking about this, the same thing exactly, but I think it's the underlying problem is it's a zero-sum game. There's, you know, the US government pays $160 billion to do research, but yet that goes to scientists, and to them it's a zero-sum game. If you spend money in dealing with data wrangling for other people to use my data, then I get less money to do research. So ultimately, it's a cultural problem, okay? And it's the culture of science that puts, you know, you're doing new things ahead of your sharing and doing them more effectively and efficiently. I'm just exploring this concept myself, but I think that's what it comes down to. Is, you know, because the reason industry does it is because they can invest. They have a lot of risk capital that they invest. They know what the risks are, of course, and that's why they've advanced. And the complexity of the data that's in your phone is amazing. The kinds of data and the scale and the velocity and the variety is, I'm sure, every bit as difficult as science. It's just there's a will to do it and resources put to it.
Yeah, a will to do it and the patience. Surprisingly, the commercials are actually outpacing us in terms of patience here. You can't build these things up in 3 yearly funded stop-start cycles.
Yep. You know, science is the lead. Now industry leads.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's even more difficult when we try to get funding for regular operations, you know, in between the development funding. And there we're also competing effectively against ourselves, so that can be really challenging.
Yeah, it is true that they're much more monolithic than the variety of people and institutions and things that have to be coordinated. But yeah. Anyway, it's a very interesting question to explore. I don't, you know.
Yeah. Yep. And so we don't claim for a minute to have the answer. We just think that this is in the right direction. And simply to be able to butter knife funding as it comes in through different national actors, so that when one of your lead customers or lead participants is in a lull, you might be able to use funding from another one who just happens to have sunk a bag.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge to be able to do that, but I think in the end, through such cooperation, that's how we're going to have to survive. I'm also wondering, though, seeing your talk, Guido, and Lily's, whether you guys are seeing any commonalities amongst between your experiences.
Lily, go first.
Sorry, I'm a little distracted. You mean experience for what topic?
Oh, so I didn't mean to throw you under the bus. I was just politeness. I can start. We're definitely tracking what the GORC are doing. Slightly more focused on the compute and VM part, it seems, in the definition of a cloud. We're more focused on base storage and basing ourselves on the longevity of the data stores that happen to have been vested inside of our niches. But the intent and the stated goal is nearly the same.
Yes, I agree. For the GEOS initiative, so far is carried out by CoData, and we have a lot of institutions and experts join the whole team. I think we just received a question from Romain that asking for if there is something common for the repository solutions, and for the GEOSC initiative, probably we will develop something in common, as Guido already introduced their interoperability platform solution. We will also develop a kind of similar things and get connected with different partners around the world and try to provide those collaborative virtual environments. So in this way, scientists from different sites and where they could have better source of data merged, and they could have their data processed and collaborative with similar scientists around the world for a larger topic of their research, like for larger scale of disaster mitigation and things like that. And on the other side, we need to carry on our ideas case by case, like those showcases we have already selected. Some of them in astronomy, some of them in space physics. It's not just a one-size-fits-all solution, and it's also not the story developed only by those code developers themselves to establish those virtual environment. We need scientists to engage, and we also need to develop a kind of certain mechanisms, a model that could attract those scientists. So it should fit into their specific needs for a certain topic of research. So this way, our virtual environment development could be really useful. So that's it. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, both of you. I also see a question in the chat for Kirsten from Bonnie. Bonnie, did you want to elaborate, or?
Well, I don't, it really is a question. Maybe I should know the answer, but ESIP and your system are both very much funded by NASA and everything. How do the two relate to one another? How do they differ? And I assume you work together closely. So I was just kind of curious how you would, describe that.
Well, I mean, NASA really is the funder, the provider. And I mean, just having been here in this workshop over the last 2 days, it is clear that many of the people in the offices at NASA don't fully oversee and understand the landscape of all the different repositories and facilities that they fund, because they come, the funding comes out of different programs and so on. So, you know, I noticed that some of them didn't even know about ESIP because ESIP is very, very connected to the NASA Earth Sciences Division, but the planetary sciences is not as much integrated there. So there has to be a lot more communication, I think, engagement on both sides with, you know, the pulling the funders into the discussions at ESIP, while, you know, ESIP probably needs to reach out to NASA to be more present in that work. But, you know, again, thinking back of the last 2 days, it actually was all about, you know, the complementarity versus competition among repositories that play a role in this particular ecosystem of astromaterials data, which is, for those who don't know, it's, you know, all the material that's being brought from space or collected here on Earth, like meteorites and stardust and so on. And these are all highly, highly valuable materials, and data has been very fragmented, and we're starting to look at, you know, who are the players actually and how much overlap there is, and nobody understands what their scope is. and so I think we're starting to create more of a mapping of the landscape and trying to help NASA basically understand how they should move forward in building a network and ecosystem of these planetary data resources, rather than leaving it up to all the individual systems to fight for their role in this world. So there's a lot of, I think, communication missing.
Yes, and I see that Roman David has also weighed in on this. Roman, did you want to elaborate at all?
No, I think I'm totally agree with Kirsten. We have a great lack of integration of networks, just because lots of people don't know what they have and what they could use. And today, the thing that we have to do is not to improve technology, but it's communication lacks. So thank you, Kirsten, for your remark. I totally agree.
I mean, the other thing is that, you know, and this is one of the experiences from the Council of Data Facilities as well, that clearly, you know, every one of the facilities wants to survive and wants to obtain the funding. So nobody is saying, oh, you're doing the same as we do, then you do it, right? No, everybody is trying to hold on to their purpose, and that's fully understandable. So I think, and you know, this more competitive nature of the data landscape and repository landscape has been in some way fostered through the way funding is provided through a competitive process, rather than, you know, supporting much more the collaboration, the linking, the you know, finding ways to be complementary. And, you know, we've seen that with the CDF in being unable to get a proposal into any of the funding agencies and say, look, we want to build something shared. And there are all these concerns always. I said, no, we don't really want to do that. You know, you need to, you know, first figure out your governance and so on. So it's a bit of a frustration that, you know, the networking and collaboration side is not more emphasized and supported.
Yeah, that is a challenge. And it might be an opportunity, though, in terms of for the repositories funded by NASA, and that some of the astro repositories could probably benefit from collaborating with some of the earth science repositories in that regard?
It will be very interesting. I mean, it's a landscape, that on the one hand is very controlled with the planetary data system, which is all mission data. And this astromaterials world that until just basically this year was completely neglected because it's work done on materials after the missions are finished. So it never received a lot of attention. And so suddenly we're realizing, what is needed, that there are all these disparate little efforts and that there is lots of overlap.
Yes, it reminds me of the funding cycles for producing data for decades, and not funding any place for them to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Almost ridiculous when you think about it.
When you think that's really one, you can't believe how much resources go into collection of these materials. There's the Mars mission is in preparation, and the resources going into the curation of these materials, and then the analysis, and then there has never been a data repository to take it.
Yeah, that was why I made the point that even if you produce something at sort of 80% of readiness level, there will always be a couple of researchers who could come out of the woodwork with amazing sets of disks they stored under their desk going, can we please put this on? You're like, what is that? People with 5,000 USB sticks. Like, where did you get? Well, we managed to scrounge them.
Yep.
Wow. Just wow. Yeah. Yeah. And another one on, even though a number of larger funding regimes have figured out that e-infrastructure needs to be funded too, it's still often being done from the cookie cutter of research funding. Even for this one, some of the comments were, so you're proposing to reuse existing APIs? Yeah. So it's not novel then. That wasn't the point. You should be building a new one. And another one. So we just had our month 18 review, which in EU funding is a big one, right? We survived, good. And one of the reviewers went like, where are your scientific papers? But we're building something which is, we're not gonna, if we could write a paper about it, it wouldn't have the technology readiness level you want from us. Which do you want? Yeah. And I mean, I get why they're saying it, and they're in good stead to say it because these are the rules they're used to. But this whole understanding of what sort of calm abiding and patience you need to have to build an infrastructure so that after 2 or 3 funding cycles, a lot of research groups go like, that thing isn't going away, we might just trust it, is so sort of oblique to trying to write papers about it. It's, yeah.
I can fully sympathize with that feeling, yes.
Yeah.
So maybe it brings us back to collaboration. Can we have more of a common message here that we speak with, get the message over,
Well, like I said, so we happen to be, we're in the beautiful position that we are funded and we are packing on user numbers. If you want us to weigh in on a case like that and say, hey, what they're doing over there looks like what we're doing here, so there is, or you could, you can reuse the entire governance and point out, look, this is what those people are trying to do. Clearly, it makes sense, etc. More than happy to share those details. And if somebody wants to see whether it's useful for us to try and interlink with existing groups of maybe blocks of repositories, I don't know, I'd love to investigate that. Now that this snowball is rolling anyway, my intent isn't to make everything look like a sync and share service. That's not it. It was just a target of opportunity. It happens to work. It happens to gel with a lot of people, and it is extensible that you can plug a lot of things into the side. So if I can help in that respect, but again, like I started my presentation saying that I realize full well that we're not a repository. That's not my point.
Yeah.
I've realized that we're sort of the uncouth little brother of the repository, but if we can help, it's packing on the users, and that is always of such great motivational strength. Funders see that, university admins see that it helps.
Yes, I see Roman has his hand up too. Roman, did you want to add a comment or question?
Yeah, just a remark about this conversation. I like very much what are the exchange now. I think that the most difficult for people that don't know exactly what is a repository, or for them it's just somewhere you put your data and it's finished. What is the first step? And the first step, it's really hard to build with people, and I think that we must care about that. It's my opinion, but because I have experiences in 3 domains: oceanography, agronomy, and the last one, not least, is a highly pathogenic agent, and it's a mess. So first step, what is it? And when I've heard Kirsten presentation, I'm really happy to see that there are lots of progress to do everywhere, but I think that we have lots of things to understand and to use to progress. So first step, what is the first step?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that same question. So what should we do? Maybe the last 5 minutes, is a gathering of ideas.
Yeah, and I just wanted to just add a little thought here, and regarding your comments, Kirsten, about bringing in all these materials, and now we're starting to think about the infrastructure for keeping them. And I can't help but think about the fact that we now have international efforts to work in space. We've got the space station, which is a shared infrastructure, really. The nations have been able to cooperate on this and creating this place where various groups can go and from various countries and collaborate even further. So I think that's almost a model for how the different nationalistic funding efforts could begin to work together, so that not only can more be done, but more collaboration could probably be done across nations.
I mean, I think there are, would be really interesting again to compare or study, successful and unsuccessful initiatives or projects to build internationally structured, don't want to call it repositories, but data access facilities and so on. I'm always bringing up the Global Biodiversity Information Facility as an example where international collaboration has really worked to build a global network of information that is supporting science in, in my view, in a unique way so far. There are other examples of international infrastructure or programs, be it international ocean drilling and so on, that some have worked better and some haven't. So maybe we can learn from those ongoing or dead activities in where it went wrong and how to approach that.
Yeah, and I see that Roman also had added some comments here. Roman, did you want to elaborate?
Sorry, can you repeat? I didn't understand.
Oh.
What? What did you say?
I saw your comments,
Yes,
and did you want to elaborate?
about successful and unsuccessful experiments.
Yes.
Yes, okay, that's something very fundamental in life science. You know, when you try something and it don't work, and you have non-usable data, but they are not non-usable, they are usable for others to not make the same, not have the same mistakes, but it's often lost data, and it's often non-created data, and they are not in repositories, and they have no metadata, and that's a pity, I think. So there is a progress to do in this direction. So my opinion is that we have to develop something with unused data, because it's not because they are unused that they are not unusable, and perhaps they are usable and they are primordial.
Certainly that makes sense. Well, I think that one advantage we have in this forum, and we see it in the different discussions, is that we're representing various disciplinary groups here that are using repositories, and even though there are different disciplines represented, the stories are very common and the challenges are common. So it would make sense to be able to, share ways to overcome these challenges. And the other part of that is to find ways to get the funders on board with that as well. If we could get international cooperation amongst the funders, because if we're developing something in one country and they're developing the same thing in another country, it's a little bit redundant, where we could be, building on the ideas of others and taking those successes and making more successes out of them. Anyway, I see that we're about out of time right now. So I was wondering, do we have any last comments from anybody?
I think this may be a good topic to further explore for upcoming meetings. I think my feeling was right now that the discussion is just starting. And unfortunately we're out of time. So I think there is a real need to talk about these type of collaborations, because there is clearly more recognition of the benefits of working together, the need to work together, and so we need to figure out how to do it.
Yes, I agree. So with that, I would like to say, everybody, thank you very much for joining us, and especially Guido, who's up in the middle of the night now for us, and Kirsten and Lily. This has really been great. Thank you, everybody, for your wonderful comments. This is really informative. And I agree, we should continue this kind of discussion for our next P19, that would be. Anyway, thanks again, everybody, and it was great having this session with you.
Hey, Graham wants to send a survey. Quick.
Yeah, so the Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group, we're currently doing a survey about models of data stewardship, and I think members of this community, if you can actually engage with that, that'd be fantastic, because we want to hear about what are the many and varied ways of doing data stewardship and services and stuff out there. And I think some of this discussion feeds into that really quite nicely. And I think there's some communities to engage with as well. So that'd be fantastic. If you can follow that survey and sort of fill it in. There is the link for it going around on various groups. If you've not seen it, just get in touch with me and I'll pass that on. Thanks.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Graham, and we'll watch for it. And everyone, thank you very much for joining.
Bye.
Bye-bye
Cheers.
now.